Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. Our final presentation today, before we all go off and have drinks, is Atif Siddiqi with Branch. And his presentation are the top 5 things retail employees are looking for today. And he's going to open up our eyes about what's happening in a very tight labor market. Atif.
Thank you. And Sarah, thanks for those entrepreneurial insights. As an entrepreneur myself, I'm going to try to put a feel of it. Personally, very terrified of the outcome. As you mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about retail employees today, what they're looking for. I think a common theme for most of the presentations here were, how important people are to the business. They're an important asset to any retail operations. So before I did that, I wanted to maybe give a little bit of background on my own entrepreneurial journey. I mentioned earlier moving from Los Angeles to Minnesota and being part of this community. I found myself 3 years ago as an entrepreneur in residence at Idea Lab, a big technology incubator in Pasadena, California. And, about a little after 6 months after starting Branch, got some interest from some retailers here in the region in Minnesota and find myself in the hospitable climate of the North. But like I said earlier, it was really the community here that embraced kind of what we're doing, especially the retailers in the region. But really the genesis for Branch started from my own journey as a retail associate decades ago. I had worked in a retail job and found myself in the workplace relying on pieces of paper in a back room, very similar to that one right there, for work critical information like my schedule, company updates, and especially if there were additional shifts in the organization or at the store that I could pick up. So I knew this was a problem. I knew most employees were bringing their mobile devices now into work and using them. So I decided to go out on Colorado Boulevard. It's a long street out in Pasadena where about 100 different shops, and started talking to employees of like, what are they doing today? I thought there has to be a better thing, there has to be some technology today. And they're like, nope, that's exactly what we do. We have that piece of paper on that back wall and we have to come in, sign it off, and manager signs it. I'm like, okay, let's figure out something better than that. So what we did with Branch was launch it as a free application. Just any retail associate could get started with it, and they could swap shifts with one another. The managers could post shifts and they could pick up additional shifts. As you can see here, it took off to tens of thousands of different retail locations and all the companies you see here, just organically. But word of mouth started spreading. With that spread, we started getting interest from their employers saying, hey, what is this? And one of those employers happened to be Target. And so they encouraged us to apply to the Techstars Target Retail Accelerator, which is what brought us here. And really, with Branch, what we were doing is finding additional ways for employees to earn additional income, right? So we were really focusing on ways that we can help them grow financially. Typically, these were employees that, made under $35,000 a year annually. They were living paycheck to paycheck. And we really focused in on retail, restaurant, logistics, kind of call center employees. So all different types of business units that touch retail. And I think, it would be important to maybe highlight kind of the impact Branch is having on retail associates today. So first, the application. It's one, the ability for employees to make additional income. So by a click of a button, employees can see available shifts that they're qualified for and pick them up instantly. Managers can then go ahead and approve. The second important thing is helping them manage their cash flow. So understanding, how living paycheck to paycheck, how I can make it to the next paycheck. And really the goal here is for the employee to continue to grow their daily account balance, bank balance over time. And then finally is the ability to cash out for that shift instantly after it's done at no cost to the employer. And so, we had all the data around their time and attendance when they showed up, how much they make. And so we're supplying them the money as soon as they finish a shift, and they pay us back once they get paid. Very simple. So now to the impact Branch is having, I guess, on associates today. So in the retail industry, employs 29 million people. And as you all know, a high degree of turnover across the industry. Anywhere we see from 60 to 160%, depending on the type of retailer. Obviously, a huge cost to the bottom line to continuously train, recruit, onboard new employees. here in Minnesota, one of the things that to note is that unemployment rate with an all-time low. There are more jobs per, people looking for jobs right now. So it's 2.5 million jobs in the retail sector. It's the second highest industry for job openings. So huge need for this workforce. The ability to attract and retain new workers is really important, obviously. So what does this mean in this market? Well, unemployment all-time low, high turnover. The cost it takes to attract and hire a new employee is about $2,500. And that's when you figure in training, recruiting, onboarding. You multiply this by tens of thousands of employees you have, that's a big, big number and a big significant challenge. So, what I want to talk about, what are retail workers looking for and why would they stay with the employer? Big part of that has to do with, the stability that you can provide in financial life. So before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about who is this employee, what kind of makes up their financial picture. The first, I mentioned, living paycheck to paycheck, they deal with variable income. And this happens to be because their schedules are very variable. They get 20 hours one week, maybe 30 hours another. So it makes it very tough for them to plan kind of week to week. The second is that, they have little or no access to credit. The vast majority of these employees rely on a debit card or cash for most of their purchases. And then finally is that most have little or no savings. So the stat, I think that gets tossed around just in the working population in America in general is that 40% have less than $500 saved. Well, with retail employees, it's about 75%. So what do they look for most in the workplace? Well, the first is higher wages. Makes sense. And it makes sense because over the last 40 years, when you adjust for inflation, the real average wage for a retail employee has stayed, purchasing power stayed the same. And this is due in part because of rising costs in healthcare, rising tuition costs. There's $1 trillion student debt problem. That's trillion with a T. And so when you look at kind of this segment of retail workers and what they're looking for, it varies from different age demographics. A little bit of older workers, their main concern is healthcare. Younger is obviously student loans. One of the ways we've been able to bridge kind of this need is to help them deal with some of those unexpected emergencies or financial needs they may have. So you have, transportation issue, an unexpected medical bill. So just bridging that gap. And there's solutions that retailers can take right now by offering incentives like access to wages in advance of their 2-week payroll cycle. The second I mentioned is, having a predictable schedule. This is important, again, because it makes it very difficult for an employee to kind of plan out their lives if they don't know exactly, how much they're going to make throughout the week on a consistent basis. And so over 40% of retail employees are looking for, some type of flexibility when it comes into their schedule. This also has to do with a little bit of changing consumer demands, on-demand economy. You can drive a car, pick up a shift, cash out at your own time, at your own leisure. And so, some of those changing consumer demands are kind of driving this need for especially younger populations in the workforce like Gen Z and millennials. Some progress has been made from a legislative basis on things like predictive scheduling, right? Reducing the amount of on-call shifts, reducing the amount of opening shifts where you close, then you have to open. But anything we can do around the scheduling dynamics to make those a little bit more predictable and flexible for the employee go a long way. The third and fourth, really it has to do with the workplace environment and the engagement that's fostered with a retail employee. Long gone are the days of like a company intranet. Most of these employees are not relying on email for their primary means of communication. So it's reaching them where they are on their mobile device. Oftentimes companies are not allowed to collect phone numbers from employees and they can't text them. So what we've done is really, kind of created sanctioned communication channels that allow for top-down communication to disseminate information to retail workers. I think a good example of this, we work with a large convenience store based in Des Moines called Come and Go. And, the information that they're pushing out to their employees is not operational information or things, tasks that they need to do, but it's recognition. It's, really lifting the workers up about good things that, make them feel a part of something larger. And that's why they keep coming back. And, it's been a great way for them to drive great engagement amongst their retail workers. And as a result, they have, they've been able to decrease their turnover rates by about 70%. And the fifth I want to highlight is, which is kind of surprising, is that, most retail workers, I mentioned they're looking for additional wages, but they're also looking for growth. So they would prefer, getting a promotion in their own company and organization rather than switching and looking for a new job. So this is an opportunity for everyone here to, provide paths for growth for these employees, so that can get them to where they want to be in their career. So even more so, especially in the 30s and 40s, you see there, it's that's more important to them than even higher wages, right? It's this ability and path to sustain growth in their careers. Finally, as I leave you with kind of these four kind of core tenets on what retail workers are looking for. It was great to see today that, people at the core, it's the most important asset that we have in a business. And, happy to answer any questions that you may have with us. Thanks. Questions? Yes.
I think it was in New York State, they were working on passing a law around communications outside of work hours. How do you see that coming down the pike for something like this?
Yeah, that's a good point. And, there's controls technology can build in place, like only unlock communication when they're at the workplace and on the clock. And I think when it comes to communication, retail workers especially, they're not going to download an application if they know their boss is going to just hammer them when they're at home. So we really sanction, and most companies have sanctioned the communication to fun things that, make them feel a part of the organization. It's like birthday, recognitions, promotions, things around that nature. Yeah.
Right there.
Yes.
Are you looking at other market segments such as line workers and those similar demographic type workers, or are you planning to just stay inside retail space? Where's your growth plan for brand?
Yeah, so some of our fastest growing segments are distribution centers, logistics, warehouse facilities. I think as a lot of labor shifts from, say, in-store to back office or logistics, we're seeing that as a very high growth market. I mean, same goes for call center employees and contact centers, right? Supporting sort of omni-channel operations require and similar challenges. They're hourly employees that, very similar challenges.
One last question. There you go.
We talked a little earlier about how culture is very important
Yeah.
in a workspace. I'm wondering how you're able to share different cultures of different organizations as the workers are moving between the different businesses.
Yeah, well, we do see different cultures between different verticals and industry segments. So a QSR, quick service restaurant, looks a little different than a big box retail store. And some of that has to do with sort of the hierarchy and kind of the, how the teams are structured within those organizations. I will say, though, like a common thread that we see across the board is this idea that their employer really cares about them and is providing them a technology that's really built for them. And it's not like a workforce management tool that they're forced to use, right?
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, if I understand you correctly, they can get paid for their shift right after they finish that. You guys pay them. Two questions. One, what do you guys get out of that? Two, how does that help them save money?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So We pay them, the employee. What we get at that is the banking relationship. So the way we make money is that anytime the employee uses our branch card to spend, we make money from the merchant, right? So it's really the employee. What does the retail worker get out of the idea of getting their funds instantly? We find average employee before they join branch and take advantage of that feature, they're spending on average anywhere from 1 to 2 overdrafts a month, right? So that's a $35 to $70 hit that can be avoided. Typically, it's about a $20 expense that puts them in that overdraft. So we look at it as like, if we can help them avoid, a $70 expense by supplying them money that they've already earned ahead of their cycle, it helps them to kind of build that bank account balance up over time.
Anyone else? Atif, thank you.
Thank you.